Hey everybody, we are going to be talking about sandwiches and what is the most important thing when it comes to a sandwich? The bread, right? I don't know about you guys, but I have found that with COVID, I'm trying to go to the grocery store as little as possible, but the two things that we always run out of are bread and milk at my house. And so I really wanted to find an easy sandwich bread recipe that is quick, not too difficult, and not too messy, and that my kids like. And so I found this recipe. It is a whole wheat Vermont bread from the King Arthur website. And so that is what we are going to be making today.
Okay, ingredient wise, you're going to need 2 cups of boiling water. That is an electric tea kettle, and I'm going to be talking about that piece of equipment a little bit later on. You're going to need 1 cup of rolled oats, old-fashioned or quick cooking oats are fine. I have old-fashioned in my cupboard, so that's what we're using. A half a cup of maple sugar or a half a cup of brown sugar packed, 1 tablespoon of honey, 4 tablespoons of butter, 2.5 teaspoons salt. The recipe calls for a teaspoon of cinnamon. Now, I would omit this depending on what type of sandwiches you want to make. It does add a nice flavor though for peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. 1 tablespoon of instant yeast. I'm going to use 1.5 cups of this King Arthur white whole wheat flour. And then 4 cups of just regular unbleached all-purpose flour. However, you could use any type of whole wheat flour instead of that white whole wheat flour. And if you wanted to use all-purpose, that would probably work out okay too.
So what I really like about this bread is, number 1, it's homemade, so you know what's going into it. Number 2, it includes whole grains, right? So you have a whole cup of old-fashioned oats, which is a really good source of fiber. And it also includes some whole wheat flour, which also includes fiber, but plus some extra nutritional benefits of some added vitamins and minerals. So there are no preservatives in this bread, so it will go bad quicker than the store-bought breads. So I tend to keep it in the fridge. Now, this particular recipe does make 2 full loaves. So if you find that you only have 1 loaf pan, or you don't want this much bread, I would cut the recipe in half. Okay, so to start, we're going to add 2 cups of the boiling water with 1 cup of rolled oats, the half of a cup of brown sugar, and you always measure brown sugar packed in tight. I have 1 tablespoon of honey. Now, a nice, easy way to measure honey is before you put the honey into whatever it is you're measuring into, I spray it with just a little mist of cooking spray so that it won't stick and it just comes out really easy. So not too much stuck in there. Okay, and now I'm going to need I'm going to add, I have my salt and my cinnamon here. I did cut the cinnamon in half just so that it's not a super strong cinnamon flavor to my bread. But if you like cinnamon in your bread, like I said, it goes really good with peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Go ahead and throw that whole amount in. And then last but not least, I need to add my 4 tablespoons of butter. Now, like I said before, all of these sticks of butter have the tablespoons marked off. So I'm just going to cut off 4 of those, and I'm not going to worry about melting this prior to, because I'm going to add that boiling water to this mixture. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut it into small pieces though to start it off so that it's easy, it melts a little bit easier once I add that boiling water. Okay, so I haven't added my water yet, but I want to tell you a little bit about this electric kettle. I love this. I never thought I needed one until I bought one, and it does the same thing as a kettle that you put on the stove top, except it boils water a lot faster. So if you tend to be using boiling water quite often, I make my French press coffee every morning, and I love having this to boil my water really quickly. If you wanted to get a jump start, if you're making pasta and you wanted it to go a little faster, you could heat up the water in your kettle before you add it to your pot. So all you do is you just fill it with as much water as you need, and you just click that on, and there's a heating source that goes in through here, and it will boil it within a matter of maybe 3 minutes. Okay, so my water's almost at a boil. I can hear it coming to a boil now. It will just automatically click off once it has hit that boil. So I have not started preheating my oven as of yet, and that is because we are using yeast in this bread, and so we're going to have to let the dough rise for an hour till it doubles in size once we have it all set to go. So don't bother preheating your oven as of yet unless it's freezing in your house and you want to warm up your house. But I'm going to hold off on that until about 20 minutes prior to my bread being ready to go into the oven. So it just turned off. I need 2 cups of this boiling water. Using my liquid measuring cup and being very accurate, I'm just going to go ahead and add that to my oat and butter and brown sugar mixture. And like I said before, this boiling water should easily melt that butter over time. Just give it a good stir, and then we are just going to let this melt and let those oats soak until the temperature of the liquid gets down to the happy temperature for yeast. Which, can you guys remember what that happy temperature for yeast was? I know it's been a while since we made bread. 110 to 115 degrees. So have your thermometer handy, and you can go about your day doing whatever you need to do, and then just come back and measure this every now and then. In the meantime, though, go ahead and measure out your flours, which I have already done. I measured out 1.5 cups of my white whole wheat flour, and then 4 extra cups of just regular all-purpose flour. And remember, the proper way to measure flour is to fluff it, gently spoon it into your measuring cup so that you're not packing that flour, overfill it, and then you're going to want to just level off the top. Okay, that's the proper way to measure flour. That way you won't end up with a very dense loaf or cookie or bread or whatever it is that you're making. Okay, so our liquid has cooled down to a perfect 112, and so we're going to go ahead and add the yeast. Now, what is in here that the yeast could use as food? I can think of a couple things. The brown sugar, the honey. It could also eat some of the starches that's coming off of the oats that have been soaking, right? And then it'll also eat some of the starches in the flour, and that is what's going to be feeding our yeast. So we need 1 tablespoon of instant yeast, and I'm just going to sprinkle that on top. Give it a stir, and then I'm going to go ahead and add my flours. Now, this is something that you could totally do the entire thing in your KitchenAid mixer or any other stand mixer that you have if you happen to have one. I'm just going to do it by hand to show you how easy it is to make bread by hand as well. So I'm going to go ahead and add my flours. This is both the whole wheat and my all-purpose flour. Just going to add that all in. I have cleaned off my counter prior to this. And I am going to mix this in until it comes together and forms kind of a thick dough, and then I'll turn it out and knead it. Now, if I am doing the whole thing in my stand mixer, and I am going to be kneading this in the stand mixer, it will only probably take 5 to 7 minutes to knead it with the machine, because the machines are much stronger than you are. But since I'm doing this by hand, it'll probably take me more like 10 minutes to knead this by hand. Okay, it's getting really thick, so once it gets too thick to kind of stir, you can just plop it out onto your counter. Careful, it's a little messy. Get all the bits out, even the really dry bits, because we're going to knead that together until it forms a ball of dough. Okay, take my ring off. Still nice and warm. And remember, I know we've talked about this before, but the purpose of kneading your dough is to develop that gluten, and that is what is going to help your dough rise and give it that nice, beautiful crumb. Oh, look, there's a big chunk of brown sugar in there. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. This dough doesn't feel like it's going to be too wet. However, if your measurements were slightly off, even just a little bit, it could drastically change the texture of your dough. So you may need to sprinkle a little bit more flour on your counter, but I try not to do that because if a lot of people will accidentally sprinkle the flour in a little too early because it seems sticky, but I'm telling you, the more you knead it, the less sticky it will get. And the problem with adding too much flour to your bread is that you'll end up with a really dense loaf. It won't be nice and light and fluffy and perfectly chewy bread. So I'm just going to knead this for about 10 minutes. Okay, so I've been kneading this for about 10 minutes, and this is a good workout because this dough is a very thick dough. It is not hydrated very much, and remember we talked about the hydration of dough, so that means that there's not that much water to flour, the ratio. So I've been kneading it for about 10 minutes. This is not going to be a smooth dough even after you've done kneading it because of those big chunks of oats in it. So I'm just going to try to form it into as nice of a ball as I can. I'm using the palm of my hand to push down and kind of push it against the counter and then pull back with this side of this hand, and that forces it into a smooth top. Okay? Then I'm going to take my bowl. I've wiped it out with all the flour and stuff. And I'm going to add a little bit of oil to it, and then I'm just going to spread that oil around with a paper towel to coat the sides. And remember, this is to help the bowl be nice and slick so that as the bread is rising, it doesn't get stuck on the bowl and prevent it from its full potential of rising. So I'm just going to go ahead, I'm going to put this into the grease bowl and kind of flip it around so that there's a little bit of oil on every side of this dough. And then I'm just going to take a tea towel and I'm just going to cover the bread, and I'm going to stick it in a warm place of my oven, or a warm place in my kitchen, and I'm just going to let that rise for about an hour until it's nice and doubled in size. So set your timer and go hang out, and I'll see you in about an hour. Okay, so my dough has been resting for about an hour, and let's take a look. As you can see, it has beautifully puffed up. That means my yeast is very happy and has a nice spring back. Although you can still kind of see my finger in there when I push it in, and the whole dough doesn't deflate. So that means that I've let it rise a really good amount of time. So I'm going to be dividing this into two separate loaves at this point. And I'm going to use my scale to do this just to make sure that each loaf is the same size. However, if you just want to eyeball it, you can do that as well if you don't have a scale. So I just gently scooped my dough out. I have my pans. Now, I just wanted to show you, I have two different sized pans. So the thing that I need to watch is the cooking time for these. This one is smaller. This is an 8 by 4.5, and this one's a 9 by 5. So the one that's in the 9 by 5 is going to actually cook faster than the smaller pan, and that's because the batter will be spread out more in the pan. So there's more surface area, so it'll cook a little bit faster. So I'm going to put them both in at the same time. I'm just going to keep my eye on both of them and take them out when they're ready. Okay, so I'm going to spray both of these. Grease them up. If you just want to spread some vegetable oil on them, you can, but I'm just using the spray, making sure I get the bottoms really well. Then I'm going to turn on my scale so that I can make sure that this is equal portions. So I got 1 pound 11 ounces and 1 pound 8 ounces. So let's add a little bit to that. Okay, so how do we shape our dough? So I'm going to take my pan, I'm pushing out all of the gas bubbles And I want to kind of get it into a rectangle if I can. And I want the rectangle to be about the same width as my pan. Okay? If I find that it's having a hard time stretching out, I'm just going to go ahead and walk away from that one and work on this one. And we're going to let that gluten kind of relax, and then I can come back to it and it should be able to stretch out a little bit easier. It might take about 5 minutes to rest. Okay, so once I have my rectangles about the right size, I'm just going to kind of roll them up the way you would roll a cinnamon roll. So I'm going to kind of make sure I'm kind of getting it in there nice and tight. I want the edges to be the same thickness as the center. Kind of give it a little roll on that seam. See the seam? Kind of just a little roll on that seam to make sure it's nice and sealed. And just plop it in my pan. Okay? Don't worry, because it is going to grow again because of the carbon dioxide that is released from that yeast, and it's going to fill that pan. So let's go ahead and do the second one. Same thing. And then just give it a nice roll to seal that seam and put it nicely in there. Now, you might want to just give it a little dust of oil on the top. I'm going to go ahead and cover these again with my towel, and I'm going to let these sit in a warm spot in my kitchen again for about 60 to 90 minutes. You want it to be about an inch above the rim when it's ready to go in the oven. So I'm going to keep my eye on that, and when I think I've got about 20 or so minutes, because it takes my oven about 15 to 20 minutes to get really nice and hot and perfect, I'm going to go ahead and start preheating my oven. Okay, so it is very cold in my house right now, and so the colder it is in your house, the longer it's going to take for your bread to rise and be ready to be baked off. So mine, I've been letting mine sit for about an hour and 40 minutes. Again, if it is warm in your house, then the process will happen a lot faster. If it's really cold and you want it to happen a little bit quicker, what you can do is you can turn your oven on for just a little bit until it gets warm inside, then turn it off, and then go ahead and let your bread proof in your oven. In that warm air will help it to proof a lot faster. But I think that I am ready to put this in the oven. One sign that tells me I'm ready is when I push on it. You can still see just a small dent. It doesn't deflate, but it doesn't pop up and erase my fingerprint altogether. So if you wanted to, you could take an egg wash and egg wash the top of your bread, and maybe even sprinkle some oats on top to give it a nice, beautiful kind of look and shine. I'm just going to bake them off as is though, and I'm going to stick them in the oven. The whole process, let's see, it should take between 35 to 40 minutes to cook completely. However, I'm going to keep my eye on it, and if the top starts to brown a little bit too much, I'm going to go ahead and lay some aluminum foil on top to prevent the top from browning anymore while allowing the inside to cook more. Okay? I'll know when it's done when the internal temperature of the bread registers 190 degrees on my thermometer. That same thermometer that I use to check the liquid temperature for the yeast, I'm just going to shove it into my bread, and I want it to be 190, and that tells me that it is cooked through. Okay, so my bread has been in there for about 36 minutes. I'm going to pull it out and take the temperature to see if it's ready. So I'm looking for 190 degrees. I'm not inserting the thermometer all the way to the bottom so that it's touching the bottom of the pan, because if that was the case, the pan is hotter than the actual bread and it would give me a false reading. So it is exactly 190. Okay, so this bread is done. So I'm going to go ahead and let this cool in here for just a couple minutes, and then I'm going to run a knife around the sides to make sure it's not sticking, and I'm going to pop it out and let it cool on a cooling rack until it is completely cool before I decide to cut into it. Okay, so I just took out the loaf of bread that's in my smaller pan, and it's only at 180. So I'm going to go ahead and pop this one back in the oven for probably about 5 more minutes, and then I'm going to check it to make sure it gets to that 190 degrees. Okay, so this has been resting for about 5 minutes. My other loaf of bread came out perfect at 190 after those last 5 minutes. I'm just running this around the edges to make sure that it's going to come out easily, hopefully, and doesn't stick to the bottom of the pan. There we go. And then I'll just let that go ahead and cool completely before I slice into it. Another way to tell if the loaf of bread is done completely, if you don't have a thermometer, is you can just tap the bottom of it, and it should sound nice and hollow when it's nice and cooked through. Okay, so that's our loaf. Okay, so now that I've depanned both of them, you can tell the difference of the shape based on the pan that I used. So this pan was the bigger pan, and so the bread spread out more and was a little flatter, whereas this pan was a little smaller and tighter, and so it rose a little bit more, so it's a little taller. So the pan does make a big difference. Okay, so like I mentioned before, this bread is beautiful for a few days. Now there are no preservatives in this, so it won't last long on the counter. So I tend to, as soon as it's cool, I'll slice it into whatever size thick slices that I like. And I will maybe leave a little bit out on the counter that I know that I'll get through in a few days. And then the rest of it I stick in a Ziploc bag, and I'll either put it in the refrigerator, it'll last a little bit longer, or after it's been sliced, you can easily freeze it. And then just pull out a couple slices as you need them, and it's great toasted, just straight out of the freezer. Okay, enjoy.